This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, MICHAEL COVEL. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. He doesn't need much introduction. One of my most popular guests, back on the show today, Larry Hite, a market wizard. If you don't know that book, you've got a problem. His book, The Rule, got to check that out. One of the trend-following pioneers. Enjoy Larry Hite and myself catching up. Tell me what's going on. What's interesting?
What interests me is how solid trend following across the board is. What a fucking miracle it is. Sorry to throw an F-bomb. But when you really start to think about this, what happens? A lot of information that we read is kind of useless because you only get fractions. It's like when you hear the word blue, we don't know what it is. It could be powder blue, it could be navy blue, it could be metallic blue. But when you deal with numbers and moving averages and the kind of things that trend followers do, you always know exactly a 50-day moving average crossing a 200-day moving average. Everybody knows. And over the years, I'm 82 now. I still read a lot of books, but the stuff really holds.
It keeps you excited. I can hear it in you. You can't stop thinking about how cool it is.
Yeah, and practical. My nephews, we call him Grandpa Larry, but Sharon's grandson. So he has a friend who's 16 years old, and the kid has made $300,000 over the last 2 years trading. When he heard about my book, he had read it about his book, and he said to his friend, my grandson, "Oh my God, I'd love to meet Larry Hite." And I really wanted to meet any kid who's 60 years old who made several $100,000. I have met a few geniuses in my life, very few. So I started to talk about it with him. And I said, "All right, what did you actually do?" He says, "Well, I go out, I get this idea, and Michael Berry he named, and I bet." I said, "What do you mean you bet?" He says, "Well, I take all my money and I put it in that." I said, "Well, and what happens?" "Well, I either make money or don't." I said, "Yeah, but then you got to start all over again." And he was a very bright kid. I said, "Well, it would be better to do this deal." But like I told him about my coffee deal, I thought the coffee was going to go up in the next year because I had a brilliant friend of mine who really understood the numbers in coffee. But I didn't know when it was going to go up. So what I did was I happened to take $1 million and I divided it into 4 piles of $250,000 apiece. Because if you looked at what was happening, consumption was going up. Yet the actual price of coffee was going down. I said, well, you can't have these 2 lines going this way. I did some research on the history of places where they grow coffee. And the places where they grow coffee normally where it's hot, where it's politically unstable, and there's a lot of corruption and all kinds of things can happen. And I said, all right, hurricanes could happen as we're seeing them now. So I said, I'm going to do this, but I'm dividing this in to 4 piles, $250,000 a pile. And of course, I was riding across France on the river on a bicycle trip, and my wife comes in, my first wife, and she says, "You're a broker." She was very English, my wife, because she was English. And says, "You're a broker." And the guy called from there, he said, "Larry, you're up $7 million. what are you going to do? How much you want to take off the table? And I said, I'm not taking anything off the table. And I was trading options. It was the only place that I could get options on coffee. Of course, the second time around, I figured coffee was going to go from $3 to maybe $4. Well, it didn't do that at all. It went always to $15. And I got out, trend following. And I explained to this very bright young guy, I said, look, this is a game. You and I have heard this in Market Wizards all the time.
But a young 16-year-old guy today might not be aware.
No. I said, look, you don't have to change what you do, but you got to stay alive. And if you stay alive, you've got to know your risk. I don't read much about fundamentals, even though I've been a fundamental analyst. I don't have a complete picture. No one has a complete picture of anything. I did one test where I knew 1 year in advance what the 10 best trading things were going to be. I had the records. Then I asked myself a question. When I had that information, how much leverage would I take? Could I take? And no matter how I did it, if I went more than 3-to-1 leverage, you'd be dead. Because although I knew exactly what the end was going to be, I didn't know the road.
Let me take it to this young guy for a second, because I think what you're really saying is you give the story, your story about coffee, you're talking about the fundamentals, just to make sure people understand what you're doing, is you're kind of laying out this scenario, the way I'm reading it, is you're saying, look, there's all different kinds of ways that you might decide to have a strategy on how to get in or how to get out or whatever. But I'm looking at right now in front of me a book called The Rule, written by a guy named Larry Hite. And I think that's what you're really trying to impress upon the young guy is that, okay, maybe your strategy's not so great now, maybe it's okay now, whatever, but you got to have your stop. You got to be able to stay alive. And I think that's the message that you're always saying to me.
And that's the only message that I know. Do you know what keeps me up at night between you and I? Jesse Livermore.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen to you. You've already passed the threshold. You're not going to be Jesse Livermore.
And I don't want to be Jesse Livermore. But Jesse Livermore had a great way of trading. And one of the rules was if he's down 10%, he stops. This was his most important rule. But you don't go bankrupt if you stop at 10%. But for some reason, Jesse Livermore did not do that and wound up blowing his brains out.
Here's something interesting, Larry. On this podcast, I talk to a lot of Harvard professors, often a lot of psychologists. They do this detailed work. They'll spend their life studying the mind and getting into motivations and decision-making and all this stuff. And they'll know exactly all of the whatever was going on inside the mind of a Jesse Livermore type that actually knew the rules and couldn't follow them and all that other kind of stuff. I think what I like about you is all of that Harvard stuff is built into the rule of getting out. Meaning you don't have to sit around and analyze everything. You don't have to sit around and analyze yourself. You just have to figure out a way to stick to the damn rule.
Yeah.
I mean, that's it, right? I mean, all the smartest people that I talk to from Harvard, places where you and I can't compete with these folks. But I sometimes wonder if the people that are too smart, they can't see the rule.
You sponsored a book by Tom, can't remember his last name.
Basso. Tom Basso.
Yeah. You hear this thing about Mensa, how they had a group that was going to trade. And in a bull market, these people made 2%. Where if you stood still and followed the trend, you had to make money. And I had it was a Jewish holiday. I happened to have two friends of mine over, very bright guys. Mark Minervini wrote a book, Trade Like a Market Wizard. And in it, he gives a list of stocks that he traded. That group, he lost 12.5% at the end of this year. He took that and he said, all right, what if I would have taken a 10% cutoff and the same stocks, throwing out the ones who went down 10%, and he kept on. And at the end of the year, where he lost 12 and a half, if he would have just done that, he would have made 72%.
It's back to what you said at the beginning of this conversation, the math. The math, the statistics, the rule, the stop loss. That's what you're known for. You're known for reminding us all to keep it simple, stupid.
Yes, and I have the grades to prove.
Let me shift and choose something with you. And maybe this is not something I've really ever asked you before, but when people are going through life, people will observe. They will see what's around them. They'll take in information. They'll make a decision. How did Larry Hite start to develop his process of observing, walking down the street in a business deal, watching some pretty ladies walk by? Talk to me about your observation, the way that you like to take in information.
I attach information in a goal sense. By defining a goal, I know if it doesn't work the way I want, I can ask myself, did I break the rule? And that's what I fucked up. Or is this one of the times like new highs didn't work out? But if you do 100 new highs, for that it works fine. But that time it didn't work. So I observe everything from the goal of making me money. And then as I got older, I noticed that my parents had friends who were lawyers and doctors. And I began to know, although they were esteemed people in our community, they didn't know fuck all about investing. One guy, a lawyer, friend of my dad's, said, well, I like to shoot crap too. And he was talking about buying very cheap stock. Well, he was a well-to-do lawyer. He didn't understand how to evaluate a stock because he had no measurement.
Just to clarify, not to evaluate the stock, but to evaluate the stock.
He thought cheap was cheap. I could tell you, I once made not a living, but when I was a broker, I was a pretty good broker, but I would, to give myself some extra money, would watch Salomon Brothers. And when Salomon Brothers dipped below book value by 10%, I would buy it and hold it till it went back to book value. That was cheap because I knew that mostly Salomon Brothers was cash and people. I had a chance to buy $1 at 90 cents, but that was a reasonable thing. It said that it couldn't go down. I was using the fundamental of the cash. I'm looking at the price. I said, well, 10% below that price, probably it'll get back. And I used to do this 2-3 times in a year. And I made money at it. But you have to have something that you're judging about. And price, the sale.
Price is it.
The price is it.
Sometimes when you tell stories, I always like to clarify. Larry Hite is a trend-following guy, a quant guy, but you've lived a long life and you've had a lot of experiences that have pushed you along the way to where you've learned. So it's not like you woke up at age 13 or age 20 and said, hey, I'm going to be a trend-following trader and start the first trend-following fund to be over $1 billion. It's not like that happened. You did all kinds of things along the way to get to your realization.
I was given at a very early age a dictum of what I was supposed to do. My father made it extremely clear what he wanted from me. I didn't give a fuck about my grades. He wanted me to support him, his mother, and anybody else in the family. And because he did that, and my uncles did that, that seemed quite normal for me. We're one step off the boat. The immigrants, they do what they got to do to support their family, which included their parents.
That's the same way over here in Vietnam still, and across Asia, really. Very similar attitude still.
Yeah. When I was in Asia, I got friendly with these Chinese guys who ran the Bank of Borneo or something like that. I found these guys exactly like the guys I knew, Jews. What were their big things? They like to eat. As they put it to me, the guy says, we gamble, Larry. But that's from our gambling pocket. Now, there's a real pocket, but we like to gamble. I will tell you something. I'll bet you I could sell my book. In fact, I did an interview with one of the large newspapers in Korea, and they came back twice to shoot the interview. They were like Jewish people.
I got to share something with you. So last night I ended up at some dinner, 10 people, a mix of men and women. And a lot of the guys there were bankers, were entrepreneurs, a couple hedge fund guys. One of the guys had asked me to bring, all Vietnamese, one Korean guy, but one Vietnamese guy had asked me to bring my big trend following book, the thick one, the blue one. It's been translated into Vietnamese now. He wanted me to bring the Vietnamese copy. He speaks English fine, but he just wanted to see the Vietnamese copy. So I brought it. One of the ladies there, I think she was working with a fund, happened to be a commodity analyst. And it was the funniest thing in the world. She's in her early 20s. She's a commodity analyst. She doesn't know who I am. She doesn't know anything about this book. And she's Vietnamese and she's reading it. And she's like, is this book about commodities? It was the funniest thing in the world. Here's this attractive lady who's got a book in her hands in Vietnamese about trading in commodities. And you would have thought she had just fallen into seventh heaven. That sums up in many ways sometimes what I see in Asia compared to the States. Not that there are not plenty of commodity analyst ladies in New York City. I'm sure there are, but I think that's just a fun little story to share where you can see sometimes that difference in Asia where people are really focused on something like trading or investing.
I was with these two guys, one a neighbor of mine and one of a friend of mine who's done very well. I took out this graph, this thing that Mark has, and I made copies of it. I said, look, these were really highly intelligent people. They came up with all kinds of excuses why this couldn't work. One guy was in the insurance business. They weren't dumb. I said, no, all you really got to do, you go back into the market if it's higher. I was quoting Paul Tudor Jones. I said, it's really simple. Goes back up. He says, but what about what you missed? I said, it really doesn't matter. What matters is where did it go? It proved that it's going up, or it's proved that it's going down. But you can't argue about what happened. There was a guy named Bob Zollner who ran a company I worked for, my first brokerage company. Zollner was a guy who went to MIT, and he has another guy named Danny who also went to MIT. This is about 9 o'clock at night, and I'm the only one in the office, and these two guys were in another office. They called me into this office, and they had a chart. They said, Larry, is this a head and shoulder or an upshot? You've heard this story.
Well, I just laughed the way you set it up because I know what's coming. I know you.
Yeah. And I just said, no, but that was a turning point in my life. I said, these fuckers who are rich, they can't tell me what's on the paper. Now, I always know.
Hold on, that's a line we need to put on a t-shirt. These fuckers are rich and they can't tell me what's on the paper.
Yeah.
That's the quotable line, Larry. Maybe the rule was not the title. The title should have been, these fuckers were rich and they couldn't tell me what's on the paper. And that would have sold 5 million copies.
Yeah, because they had all kinds of excuses. They were out of the air. We have been through this 100 times, but I want to talk to you. But I still look at this stuff and I'm really amazed. It's simple. Yes, you lose. I said to my grandson, I said, look, if you don't know about losing, you cannot win at this game.
You know, Larry, I'm looking right now at a chart and I don't know if you know this guy, a guy named Paul Mulvaney, but he's a trend following trader. He's got a track record from 1999 until today. I think he's managing like 300 million. So far this year, through August, he's up 99.83%. A pure trend following fund, very long term, classic rules. I'm looking at his track record right now, and you know a trend following track record. He didn't make 99% every year, but close to 20 over that time horizon. 2022, he's up 100%. Last year, he's up 32%. 2020, up 18%. 2019, down 21%. The point that I bring it up, though, is because if somebody looks at a trend following performance table, even going back to your old days with Mint, maybe they don't know what you're doing. But if they've got the month-by-month performance of Larry Hite or Paul Mulvaney or Ed Secoda or Tom Basso, if you've got the month-by-month performance, that in alone is an exercise to go figure out how. Reverse engineer that. Because that data is so damn interesting, especially this year. Any investor worth their salt this year should be wondering, if they don't know how, they should be wondering, how has Paul Mulvaney made 100% through August? How did that happen? People should know that information. It's amazing that people don't know.
There are a whole bunch of people who don't want to recognize the fucking value of common sense.
That might even be a better t-shirt.
And it's really true. I literally don't read much about things.
I've seen your bookshelf in your living room. You've got a few books in there, my friend.
I read books, but I don't really look at people's opinions. This also happened in Salomon Brothers. There was a woman. She was in her 30s. She had worked for this guy for 10 years. And he was for 10 years.
Here comes our section that we have to put the kids away warning.
What happened was she had a really nice job, and she probably didn't have a nice time with the sex. She was allowed to date. He was a married man. He was a big producer. One of the guys she starts to date is a New York City detective. The detective says, you could make a lot of money from that. And she said, what do you mean? Well, you could sue Salomon Brothers. Well, it turns out she did, and she won a judgment for $10 million, her and her boyfriend. I was following Salomon Brothers, and I was looking through litigation. I could not find anything. There was no mention of this happening. And I said, that really shows you a lot about what you don't see.
You knew something that was material. That material was not known to investors. That's one of those moments where you say to yourself, how the hell can I invest off the fundamentals if they're hiding shit from me?
Yeah.
This is a general story. We're not trying to get anybody in trouble. It's a long time ago, whatever.
I don't even know the guy's name. I don't know her name.
Exactly.
I'm just saying that you can't say enough worse things about the presidents we've had for the last 20 years.
Here's something that I think you do. I'm trying to think of anybody else on my podcast that does it like you. I'm not sure there is. As you said, you're 82, so maybe you just like being truly open and honest. But I've noticed in the last 10 years or so, maybe 20 years, that people self-filter themselves constantly. I'm lucky, Larry. I'm lucky. I've had a chance to meet guys like you in person, a lot of other guys in person. When that happens, for me, when I meet a Larry Hite in 2005 for the first time, I say to myself, well, maybe I'll do better than Larry. Maybe I'll do worse than Larry. But at least I've got a feel for who Larry is as a person. That experience makes me realize, oh, wow, he's just another guy that puts his pants on, too. I think what happens so much in society, people become mythical. Maybe they don't really say what's going on behind the scenes. Some people might say, gosh, Larry's got a salty tongue. Well, your podcast host, Mike, right now, who you're talking to, I've got a salty tongue, too. Okay, you and I both sometimes like to talk about the ladies. Not in a bad way. You love the ladies. I love the ladies. There's nothing wrong as a guy saying, I love the ladies. There's nothing wrong with that. So I think what you do, which is so wonderful, is you're just real. And damn it, we've lost so much of that. A lot of people out there, maybe they don't get a chance to meet a Larry Hite in person. Maybe on the podcast, they feel like, damn, I just had coffee with Larry. That was fun. Not only did I learn about his strategy, I learned he's just a normal guy who had a good process. And a normal guy who, he had some struggles, he had some ups, he had some downs, but he kept persisting. I'm just paying a compliment in the sense that I think that's why people really love your podcast, is you stay real.
Well, that's all we got.
Yeah, it's true.
But I've been noticing now, First of all, people now, I can't tell you how bizarre things are in America. I mean, this whole transgender thing. It is amazing to me. One of the kids goes to this fancy Catholic school, but they send out this memo that the kids are not allowed to talk about their mother and father. They have to use the word caregiver. I am not making this up.
I know you're not making it up. What's the purpose of all this? What do you think?
Well, we don't want to hurt anybody's feelings. You were a catcher, right? With your buddies. The real test of your really good friends, you would answer the phone, something like, "Hey, asshole, what are you doing?"
Exactly.
Right? And because you and this person were really such good friends, that was the real how it's say. You would never say to your friends, "Hey, you're looking good." You'd come up with a nifty insult.
Often crude, let's face it. I mean, that's how guys are. We say stuff.
And that's how it worked. My first wife in England, the girls went through that. She had been part of the avant-garde, and they used four-letter language. She was a very high intellectual girl. It amazes me how well trend following works. It's the right kind of information. Talking with these guys, it was really interesting how they could come up with reasons why it wouldn't work. Very nitpicky things. Trend followers are not nitpicky.
Can I just add something really quick? I want to establish on this podcast call that I did not bring up the word transvestite. And you just did a very diplomatic pivot from the transvestite subject to the trend following subject. That's the first time on this podcast anyone has ever pivoted from transvestite to trend following. I just want to make that clear. That was not me. That was my 82-year-old friend, either in New York City or Miami, who made that pivot.
Mark Anneby, I've been talking to him a lot, and he's a really interesting guy. He basically quit school in the 8th grade, but he actually understood how to be a trader very well. I wouldn't have traded like he does. It would be too much work. The rule is so simple.
He's similar to you in the sense he's got a process. He's able to keep his emotions in check. That's very similar.
Most of the people that you interview have that ability. Wouldn't you say?
I guess I've been biased interviewing trend following guys. It's very hard to interview a fundamental trader because here I am. I talked to you for coming up on 20 years. I talked to a Larry Hite for 20 years, and then I ask a bunch of fundamental traders on the podcast. On one side of my brain, I'm going to be having these Larry Hite thoughts about, well, how do you know all the information? And what if they're hiding the sexual assault lawsuit that they didn't tell you about? What does the poor fundamental guy say? I don't want to bring somebody on and embarrass them with questions they really can't answer. So I end up just talking to trend following people.
But look how similar all the people you talk to are.
There's a common thread. There's different personalities, of course. You and Mark remind me very similar in a way. But if I talk to you and I talk to, let's say, a Tom Basso, Tom is much more buttoned up, much more engineering type. You're a little more wild and crazy. But when it gets to the meat of it, your method, your thinking is very similar. People can have different personalities. People can choose different ways they want to do their daily life. But you're right. The similarities for the process is quite amazing.
You and I share a friend. He used to live in my building. Now but I moved from that building to another building. Peter Borish.
He's been on the podcast recently.
Really?
Yeah.
He's a very smart guy. I made this comment to him. I said, well, whenever I buy something, I put in a stop, expecting that he would say, of course. But he didn't say that. He said, Larry, you are an outlier. And I thought, I'm going to go back and take him to lunch and talk more about how could I be an outlier? Certainly Paul Tudor Jones does that.
Okay, but that's two people. I wasn't there, but I'm assuming that what Peter meant is, Larry, you're an outlier in the sense that most people aren't going to do what you do. They're not going to do what Paul Tudor Jones did or does. You're an outlier in that sense. But he's got to be right about that, doesn't he?
I think so.
You don't think so, or you do think so?
I do. I think he's wrong. Well, the general public doesn't do that because there's a lot of information about people who average down. Averaging down is like a suicidal kind of a concept. Did I ever tell you about my cousin? This is a true story. My wife used to know when I was talking to my cousin because I was screaming.
I've stopped talking to cousins that I have to scream at. I learned early.
Well, yeah, you were smarter than me. So I said to him, you gotta have a stop. You gotta have a stop. And by the way, he turned a couple hundred over the years. He's now worth about $700,000 from virtually nothing. Because I used to yell, you can't not do this. But he decides that Merrill Lynch has to go up because it's too cheap. So he puts $100,000, which for him was a lot of money. So we're meeting. He says, "Oh, I'm worth 110." I said, "You can't lose 110 in options. He bought $100,000 worth of options. That's it." I said, "I don't understand." He says, "Well, I went out and I borrowed an extra 10, and that was it."
Everybody wants to be rich. They don't want to think. They want to be rich. Again, back to Peter Borsch's point, maybe that's ultimately his point. He's not necessarily saying you're the only guy out there, but he's saying the vast majority of the population, just big picture, and I'm curious your point, but it's kind of sad because maybe in the last 20 years, we didn't have crazy things like the Fed keeping interest rates at 0 for 14 years and stuff like that. If we didn't have things like that, maybe people would have developed better habits and better understandings. We created this system with the Fed goosing interest rates to where people are like, oh, it's always going to go up. Let me just jump in. It's kind of sad in a way that government and people with power have not allowed the masses to have a better understanding of things because, frankly, we've put them in these boom bust situations for the last 25 years, maybe longer.
Yeah, some guy had a boom bust. It was out of Hong Kong, a letter.
Mark Faber.
Yeah. Inflation is a man-made thing. It's not like we have a hurricane now in Miami.
Joe Biden said the other day quite clearly that the reason we have inflation is because the mom and pop gas stations are charging too much. I know you don't believe that.
I'm sure he doesn't know that. I don't even know if he actually is awake. Just today, he's doing this amazing press conference, and he goes on talking about this woman and how great she was. It turns out he can't find her in the audience because she's been dead for a month. A month! I didn't say like a day. I said a month. So this guy is making a speech about one of his closest whatever, who's a hero, who he gave a medal to, and he doesn't know that she's been dead for 30 days.
It's a fun world, Larry. Maybe it's a simulation. Some higher God has got us in a computer program and we get to live through this. Look at me. Why is some American guy over here in Saigon? Maybe this simulation put me here. How are you doing, though? Is everything good?
I've been now 180 pounds for about a year and a half.
You're still working out, though, right?
Yeah, I worked out. I can now deadlift my entire weight 3 or 4 times.
Good job.
You actually walk on your hands.
I got to send you my jumping video. I've started jumping on these boxes. It's pretty crazy. Hey, let me ask you on your exercise, though. Is one of the reasons that you love it, though, too, is you can feel that testosterone boost, can't you?
Yeah, especially with heavy weights, because you can't fuck around with heavy weights. You drop a 100-pound dumbbell, falls out of your hand onto your foot. You fuck for at least a couple of months. You break bones, and you really got to pay attention to what you're doing. But answer me one question. Walking on your hands, is it more balance or strength?
It's both.
Yeah, that's what What would you think more in doing? Do you find the balance easier?
I'm a pretty strong guy, but I find the balance harder. Here's the thing, too. And a lot of yoga people don't want me to say this, but it becomes very much like a gymnastics thing, too. Gymnastics guys in the Olympics are all about 5'4", 105 pounds. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm about 6 foot 6'1". I find when you're upside down, your center of gravity, it's a little bit harder to keep it all locked in. It's a physics problem. It's a math problem, really. I mean, we don't see Shaquille O'Neal doing handstands a lot. He's got a lot more weight up there near his feet. By the way, you should Google him. He got into really good shape. Shaquille O'Neal has got like an 8-pack now. It's crazy.
Really?
Yeah. He lost a lot of weight. He's in crazy shape.
I see him in so many commercials on television. You ever hear Friends, the sitcom?
Back in the day, I try to avoid that stuff.
This one girl, I think she went out with Brad Pitt for a while.
Jennifer.
She's on every commercial.
Well, you got to make a buck, man. If Coca-Cola comes to you tomorrow, and Apple and Pepsi, and they say, Larry, we want you to be our new spokesperson, and all you have to do is show up and get filmed and say something and smile, and we're going to give you $1 million for each one. You're going to do it, aren't you?
Oh, of course.
Why not?
I can understand why she doesn't. I don't understand why they do it.
But you know what, though? I'll bet you behind the scenes, they have crunched the numbers, and they probably have a score, a celebrity score. I'm guessing this. They probably know that a woman like that has a certain score and pulls in a certain demographic and has got a certain expectation for closing ad deals. I'm sure.
Yes, that's how we would do it.
That's why they're not calling me and you, because they know if they put us on to advertise Victoria's Secret's newest thong line, they know they're not going to sell any if Larry and Mike are standing there promoting ladies' thongs. We're not going to sell any, Larry. We might buy them, but
we would help people get them on and off. We help people.
It's almost unfair of me that I do something like that with my good friend Larry, that I bring up the imagery of Victoria's Secrets. It's like taking candy from a baby that I know you can't stop taking it in your old stand-up days. You take it away.
No, I'm amazed how well some of this stuff has stood up. I get calls from people and I help them. There was a guy who was commander in the Marines, and he called me up and I said, well, look, I will take you through this if you explain to me. He did a lot of spying operations and stuff like that. So I said, here's what I want to know. How do you get through Paris Island? How does a guy or girl make it through that grueling stuff? How do you do it? If you tell me how you did it, I will tell you how to trade. So he and I became very good friends. It was about half a mile from my house.
We got to get you back to Asia again, by the way.
I'm sure that I could basically double the books that I sell in Asia.
I could for sure in Saigon get you an event. We could get you an event set up.
That would be super.
You were talking about your friend, the guy in the Navy.
He would tell me how he got through all that, how his mentally worked. These guys go through a lot of pain. I've always been amazed at people who go way beyond not only talent, but endurance. You sent me, it was a friend from San Diego that you asked me to talk to. And I said, well, how long do these guys last? And they said, oh, after they did the SEAL training, probably in a year or two, if there's 4, we lose 1.
You ended up talking to that guy that I sent you.
Yeah.
He is tough as nails.
Oh, yeah.
He told me some behind-the-scenes stories that I can't share on the podcast about some of his SEAL duties, which were just out of this world.
Very interesting. My friend who sort of has friends who were SEALs, he was telling me that one of the guys was in SEAL 6. But you have to accept certain things. Like there was a guy who jumped out of a plane. The first chute didn't open. He couldn't get the second one open, so landed on his feet and broke his legs. Anyway, I just thought I'd get in touch with you, say hi. Have you ever interviewed Paul Tudor Jones?
I've not. My observation is he does more of the corporate interviews. Let's face it, I can keep my interviews very polished and everything, but I think that he does more of the corporate stuff, the CNBC stuff. This podcast, as you know, on this particular episode, we can go in all kinds of directions. So that could scare some people, right? Let me read the title of your book really quick so people can check this out. Everyone should check out Larry's book. I see posts on Twitter. I think it's like an underground hit, frankly. I see it recommended quite a bit. But the book, The Rule, How I Beat the Odds in the Markets and in Life and How You Can Too, by one Larry Hite, who I happen to be speaking with right now. So please check that out. Great stuff.
I have one thing to add. That was my first book, as you know, and I let them do the copy. But between you and I don't beat the odds. I use the odds. That's a misnomer.
People need to realize that sometimes even guys like Larry Hite, in the publishing process, there's a lot of, not the core message, but they'll get in there and they think they're helping the marketing or some word or whatever. They mess things up sometimes.
Because in reality, I use the odds. I don't really go put myself. In fact, most of the really good traders are very risk adverse. So I'll put it to you better. We are super selective of the risks we take.
That's a perfect place to put the pin in it for me and you. We decided in the spring we were going to talk every month. So you're going to get me again either in late October or November.
Super. I know, really, I miss you. You had a tremendous education you give the world and you gave yourself. It's always good to talk to you. It's always fresh. So have a good time. I will get to Asia. I really want to do that. And I think my wife wants to do it too.
Larry, we'll talk here in the next 1 or 2 months at the latest.
Okay, bye.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.